So how do we assess iron? Iron is the major function of iron is going to be oxygen transport by hemoglobin. Both iron with a 2 plus and a 3 plus charge are highly insoluble. Therefore, we have to have transporter systems to move this around the body and to take this into tissue, into solution. Food-based iron is predominantly in the iron 3 plus form, which is tightly bound to organic molecules. Now, apoferritin can assimilate up to 4,300 iron molecules to form iron storage proteins, ferritin. And in the reticuloendothelial system, ferritin provides an available storage form of iron. Apotransferrin is a protein that combined two atoms of iron to form transferrin, which is an iron carrier that can exist in the plasma. So food iron, we have to recognize, is primarily in this Fe3 ferric state. In the stomach, where pH is less than 4, ferric iron or Fe3 iron can dissociate and react with low molecular weight compounds like fructose, ascorbic acid, citric acid, amino acids, and it can form ferric complexes that are soluble in the neutral pH of our intestinal fluid. There's a protein, DMT1, which is divalent metal transporter 1, which transports all different kinds of divalent metals and then transports the iron across the cell membrane of our intestinal cells. We can see this here. Um, these intestinal lining cells can then store the iron as ferritin. So we can do this kind of ferritin storage. So we see here ferric iron, Fe2, Fe3, Fe2, kind of this conversion back and forth. And ferritin can be stored in these intestinal mucosal cells if needed. The transfer of iron from the storage ferritin as Fe3 involves reduction to the ferrous state, Fe2, in order to be released from ferritin, this molecule. The Fe2, the ferrous state, is subsequently oxidized again by ferrous oxidase ceruloplasmin and then transported bound to plasma transferrin to wherever it's going to be stored. Storage sites in bone marrow, liver, muscle, other tissues. So if we look here, we have our ferric iron eaten, goes down our esophagus to our stomach, where the low pH ascorbic acid can convert it, reduce it to its ferrous form. It then can be transported across the membrane using divalent metal transporter 1. And then this ferric form can get stored if needed be, can get oxidized back to its ferric form to be stored as ferritin. It can become deoxidized, reduced again to its ferrous form to then be moved out of the intestinal muscle cell where it's then oxidized again by ferrooxidase and bound to transferrin, which transferrin now can transport iron to tissues. So the liver, it's stored as ferritin or hemosiderin. It can also be taken via transferrin to bone marrow or muscle or other tissues. It's then packaged in red blood cells with heme. We can have some blood loss, or we can see it moved again via transferrin back to the liver. So it's kind of the circle of life for iron. So what is our daily iron turnover? Well, it's a continuous process. I mean, our red blood cells, we can kind of look at, well, where is the iron in the body? Well, we have all kinds of different iron. If we have 1 to 2 milligrams of iron that's absorbed only, we can then have our plasma iron transferrin carriers, which can hold on to about 4 milligrams. About 1 to 2 grams per day is lost in the gut. We can have an interconversion between transferrin and myoglobin or our other stores. We can move iron to our immature red blood cells in bone marrow, which then become our red blood cells, and then can be released via breakdown of red blood cells daily back to transferrin. So we have kind of this circle of life here. It is important to know that via our reticuloendothelial system, 90% is going to be extravascular, while 5 to 10% is going to be intravascular when it comes to kind of this circle of life. How would we then measure this if a lot of it's held in the tissues, a lot of our iron is stored and hidden away? We can look at indirect measurements like red cell indices, low hemoglobin concentrations, low MCV, MCH, MCHC. We could look at blood films that are pointing towards a hypochromic microcytic picture with some occasional target cells or penciled shaped poikilocytes or even a low reticulocyte count. Bone marrow iron would be potentially normal to hypercellular. Red blood cell precursors could be increased in number. Iron stain is negative. And then there are some chemical tests that we can do on serum. Serum iron would be decreased. Transferrin or TIBC could be normal to high. And serum ferritin could be really decreased if we're looking at iron deficiency. So in iron deficiency anemia, this is a progression kind of findings, right? So we have kind of our normal state here where we have normal storage, transport, and erythrocyte iron. Um, and then over time, we can start to see iron depletion occur, where our serum ferritin is going to be low in iron deficiency. It starts to go down our storage iron that then can desaturate transferrin. Then our serum iron can start to actually, so that's our transport iron. Then our serum iron can start to drop. And so when that occurs, we have more iron binding capacity because less iron is bound places. So our iron binding capacity, TIBC, will increase. And when we're in this kind of stage here, when we're at anemia stage, we'll see that our blood cells will look small. They won't look as darkly stained. They're hypochromic. And we can see some different cell shapes and sizes. So if we had to pull one of these things to use as a screener for iron deficiency or insufficiency, we would look at ferritin because it's our major iron storage protein and it's the most sensitive indicator of iron stores. When we're looking at kind of how is iron stored and what is the relationship, we can see kind of some calculations here overall. When we're looking at percentages, we can see that if we look at these kind of ranges, the fifth percentile of considered normal would be listed here, and this is AMAB and AFAB individuals. 50th percentile here and 99th percentile here for kind of what is our, oh, it's known as normal versus high versus low ferritin. We can see typically just for context, we consider a ferritin below 30 to be considered deficient or insufficient in adults. Um, Anything above 30 we would consider not deficiency, but we would want to still optimize that ferritin value higher than that to around 50 to 60 ideally. That's when people start to feel better from an iron deficiency state. Now, ferritin has problems in being a measurement because it's an acute phase protein and can be elevated in inflammation, infection, disease, especially certain neoplasms, with alcohol, with high blood sugar, and with body mass index. So it's not a perfect system. Now, when we're looking at iron status, we can consider transferrin saturation. Total iron binding capacity is TIBC. Unsaturated iron binding capacity is UIBC. TIBC is much more common in what we order. 33% of our kind of transferrin is saturated normally, more in the morning, less in the evening. So there is a diurnal pattern. Now, soluble transferrin receptor concentrations of plasma is a good index of early iron deficiency. The basis of analysis is cells require iron to express transferrin receptors, and this is an extracellular domain, or the receptors is subject to proteolytic cleavage and are released into plasma. The number, therefore, in plasma is proportional to the number that is expressed on the cell surface, which measures iron requirements. Overall, what's the end all be all with iron? If you're looking at measurements of iron status, and if you are concerned, you'd want to consider ordering a ferritin as one of your first line screenings for iron deficiency or insufficiency. You'll also want to correlate that with a CBC with your complete blood cell count values to ensure that the patient's not anemic. You then, if you're concerned or not sure about your diagnostic susceptibility, or maybe you don't know why they are low in iron, you could look for serum iron or TIBC or transferrin to corroborate your findings. and potentially look into getting a microscopy to make sure that the cells themselves are looking normal in shape and size.